The rain hadn't started yet, but Alina could feel it coming. Seattle always announced its storms quietly, through pressure in the air, through the way the light dimmed without warning. She stood at the kitchen sink of her modest Magnolia home, rinsing the same mug she'd already washed once, when her phone lit up on the counter. Evan, her only child. Her unfinished sentence. She didn't answer right away. She never did anymore. At 68, Alina had mastered the art of delay, not because she didn't care, but because caring had become expensive. Emotionally, financially, spiritually, she answered on the fourth ring. "Mom," Evan said, breathless, as if the world were already running and she was late to it. "I need you to listen carefully." There it was, not hello, not how are you, just a verbal receipt waiting to be signed. "I'm listening," she said. He launched forward without pause. He told her he and Brianna had moved the wedding date up. Private ceremony, last-minute venue. Elegant, he said, like the word itself justified everything. It was important to keep it streamlined. Alina leaned against the counter. Her knees felt weak, though she hadn't moved. "You got married," she said, not as a question. "Yes, but listen, that's not the main thing." Papers shuffled on his end. Voices murmured, confident voices, unfamiliar ones. "There's a situation with the final payments, just a temporary gap. Brianna's parents are handling most of it, but there's a timing issue." She closed her eyes. "How much?" she asked. A pause, then, 72,000. The number landed between them like a dropped plate, sharp, loud, irreversible. "That's my retirement," Alina said softly. "I know," Evan replied too quickly. "Which is why this makes sense. You're stable, you don't need it right now, this is just a bridge." A bridge. She had spent her entire life being one. He kept talking, about invoices, reputations, embarrassment, expectations. He never once said invited. He never once said sorry. Alina stared at the calendar on the wall. A date circled in blue ink. A dress still hanging in plastic. "So," she said slowly, "you're calling to tell me you got married and to ask me to pay for it." There was irritation in his exhale now. "Mom, don't make this emotional. This is just logistics." Logistics. She tasted the word like rust. Outside, the rain finally began, soft at first, then heavier, tapping against the window as if asking permission to come in. Alina realized with startling clarity that this call wasn't about money. It was about erasure. And somewhere deep inside her, something old and quiet began to wake up. She didn't know it yet, but the decision she was about to make would cost her a son or finally give her back herself. After the call ended, Alina didn't move. The phone lay face up on the counter, dark and innocent, as if it hadn't just shifted the axis of her life. Outside, the rain settled into a steady rhythm, tapping the windows with the patience of something that knew it would eventually be let in. She turned off the stove she hadn't realized was still on. For 42 years, Alina had structured her life around usefulness. First as a wife, then far longer, as a mother who learned how to stretch a dollar, a spine, and a smile all at once. She had raised Evan on quiet sacrifices. Second jobs that didn't make it into stories, coats worn one winter too long, dreams postponed so thoroughly they forgot their own names. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. The retirement account loaded slowly, as if it, too, were hesitant. Balance, $74,118. If she paid what Evan asked, she would be left with just enough to pretend she wasn't afraid of the future. Enough to say she was fine without believing it. She imagined herself 10 years from now, older, slower, asking her son for help with medical bills, with repairs, with dignity. She already knew how that conversation would go. "Mom, I wish I could, but things are tight. Mom, you know how expensive life is. Mom, you understand, right?" She closed the laptop. Alina stood and walked into the living room. Every object there carried memory, like a quiet accusation. The armchair by the window where Evan used to read aloud for school. The bookshelf she had assembled herself after his father died, because waiting for help felt too much like begging. She stopped in front of the hallway closet and pulled out the garment bag. Inside was the dress. Slate blue, modest, chosen carefully so it wouldn't draw attention, wouldn't embarrass him, wouldn't be too much. She touched the fabric and felt a dull ache spread through her chest. Not once had Evan said, "I wish you were there." Not once had he said, "This hurt me too." The phone buzzed. A text. "Evan, did you see the invoice?" We really need to move fast on this. No question mark, no concern, only urgency. She didn't respond. Instead, Alina brewed a fresh cup of tea and sat back down at the table. She took out a yellow notepad, left over from her years working circulation desks and volunteer committees, and wrote one line at the top. What does this cost ME, besides money? The answers came quickly. Her safety, her future, her place in her own life, and something else harder to name, respect. She realized then that Evan hadn't asked for help. He had assumed it, assumed her silence, assumed her compliance, assumed that motherhood meant permanent surrender. The rain grew heavier, drumming now, insistent. Alina folded the notepad closed and stood, a strange calm settling over her shoulders. For the first time since Evan left home, she wasn't reacting. She was deciding. And somewhere, far away, her son was about to learn the difference. By morning, Alina would make a single phone call, one that would shatter the story Evan thought he was living in. Alina barely slept, not because she was anxious, but because memories, long shelved and carefully labeled, had begun sliding back into the open. At 4:30 a.m., she gave up on rest and padded into the living room, wrapping herself in the old knit cardigan Evan used to tease her about. Outside, the rain had washed the streets clean, leaving the morning pale and undecided. She made coffee this time. Strong, bitter, honest. Sitting at the dining table, Alina opened a drawer she rarely touched. Inside were folders, tax statements, insurance forms, old pay stubs, documents from a life built slowly and without applause. She hadn't kept them out of sentiment. She'd kept them out of habit. Organization had always been her way of surviving chaos. As she flipped through the papers, one memory rose above the rest. Evan at 11. He had come home clutching a permission slip for a school trip, 3 days, 2 nights, a science camp he desperately wanted to attend. The cost had been $485. At the time, Alina had $62 in her checking account and no backup plan. She hadn't told him that. She'd smiled, said they'd figure it out, then worked double shifts for weeks, feet blistered, back aching, pride swallowed daily. When Evan hugged her goodbye at the bus, his joy had been so bright it made every sacrifice feel invisible. That was the pattern. He shined. She absorbed the cost. And now, decades later, he still stood in the light. Only this time, he'd decided she belonged in the shadows. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. Evan, Mom, this silence is stressing everyone out. Brianna's parents are asking questions. Please just confirm you're handling it. Handling it. Alina stared at the words until they blurred. She realized something then, something sharp and undeniable. Evan didn't see her as a person anymore. He saw her as infrastructure. Reliable, quiet, replaceable. She stood abruptly, chair legs scraping against the floor. Her reflection in the dark window startled her. Older, yes, but not fragile. There was steel in her posture she hadn't noticed before. She picked up the garment bag again. This time, she didn't just touch the dress. She took it out, held it up, then slowly, deliberately folded it and placed it in a donation box by the door. The act felt ceremonial. Final, her phone rang, not a text this time, a number she didn't recognize. She let it ring once. Twice. Then she answered. Mrs. Hale, a polished voice said. This is Marcus from Everlie & Co. Events. I'm calling regarding an outstanding balance for your son's wedding. He indicated you were taking care of the payment. Alina smiled, small, calm, unmistakable. I think, she said evenly, there's been a misunderstanding. The silence on the other end stretched, and Alina felt it, the first tremor of something shifting beneath decades of obedience. What Alina said next wouldn't just change the wedding. It would expose a truth no one was prepared to face. The voice on the line hesitated, recalibrating. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hale, the event planner said carefully, but the invoice lists you as the guarantor. We were told the funds would be wired from your account no later than noon today. Alina closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in focus. I didn't authorize that, she replied. Her voice surprised even her. It was calm, measured, final. I wasn't present at the wedding, I wasn't consulted about the costs, and I did not agree to guarantee anything. A pause, papers rustled. Somewhere, a keyboard clicked. Well, Marcus said, his tone tightening, your son was very clear. He said you always handle these matters. There it was. Always. Alina leaned back against the counter and looked around her kitchen, the worn linoleum floor, the chipped mug rack, the sunlight creeping across the table she'd refinished herself. This room had held births, deaths, homework meltdowns, and silent dinners eaten standing up because there wasn't time to sit. "Yes," she said quietly, "I did, when he was a child." Another silence, longer this time. "Mrs. Hale," Marcus said, softer now, "without payment, the venue will escalate this. Collections, legal notices, it could get messy." Alina smiled, though no one could see it. "Then I suggest," she said, "you speak to the people who hosted the wedding and approved the expenses. They're the ones who enjoyed the evening." "That would be Brianna's family," he said. "Exactly." She ended the call before he could respond. For a moment, she simply stood there, heart pounding, not with fear but with something unfamiliar. Relief. Her phone buzzed immediately. "Evan calling," she answered. "What did you say to them?" he demanded, no greeting, no restraint. "They're calling me nonstop. You told them to go to Brianna's parents?" "Yes. You embarrassed me," he snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've told the truth," Alina replied. "Something you forgot how to do?" A sharp breath on the other end. "This isn't about truth, this is about family, about support." "No," she said, "this is about entitlement." He laughed, short, incredulous. "You're really doing this?" Over money, Alina looked at the donation box by the door, the folded dress, the life she'd been expected to keep funding without question. "No," she said softly, "I'm doing this because I finally understand the price." "What price?" Evan demanded. "My silence," she replied, "and I'm done paying it." He said her name then, not Mom, not gently, just her name, sharp with warning. "You're making a mistake." Alina felt something settle inside her, like a door closing that had been open too long. "Maybe," she said, "but it's mine to make." She ended the call. Outside, the clouds broke just enough for light to spill through, thin, fragile but real. For the first time in years, Alina didn't brace herself for what came next. She welcomed it. By nightfall, the bill would still be unpaid, but the consequences would no longer be hers alone. By evening, the house felt different. Not quieter, clearer. Alina moved through it slowly, as if reacquainting herself with a place she'd lived in for decades but never fully occupied. She cooked a simple dinner and actually sat down to eat it. She washed the dishes right away, not because she had to, but because she wanted the day to end clean. Her phone remained face down on the table. It vibrated once, twice. Then again, longer this time. She didn't look. Instead, she went to the small spare room she'd always called Evan's room, even though he hadn't slept there in nearly 15 years. The bed was neatly made. The walls were bare except for a faint outline where posters had once hung. She opened the closet. Boxes, old notebooks, a few forgotten trophies, proof of a life that had outgrown its gratitude. Alina sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel it, not just the hurt, but the anger beneath it. Not the loud kind, the precise kind. The kind that forms when someone realizes they've been edited out of their own narrative. She had been there for every beginning. Evan's first steps, first heartbreak, first failure that almost broke him. And now, at the moment his choices demanded accountability, he had reached for her not as a mother, but as a financial instrument. Her phone buzzed again. She turned it over. 5 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 2 texts. "Evan, this is spiraling. Evan, please call me. We need to fix this now. Fix it." The word landed wrong. Alina stood and walked back into the living room. She picked up the phone, not to call Evan, but to listen. The first voicemail was frantic. The second was angry. The third was quiet, stripped of performance. "Mom," Evan said, his voice tight, uncertain. "Brianna's parents are saying they never agreed to cover everything. The planner is threatening legal action. I didn't know it would get this bad. I thought you'd help like you always do." Alina sat down slowly. There it was. Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong," just "I assumed." She replayed the message once, then deleted it. The next sound wasn't the phone. It was a knock at the door. Firm, controlled, unfamiliar. Alina rose, heart steady, and opened it. A man in a tailored coat stood on her porch, holding a leather folder. "Mrs. Hale," he said politely. "I represent Everly and Co. We'd like to discuss the outstanding balance associated with your son's wedding." Alina stepped aside, not to invite him in, but to meet him where she stood. "I'm happy to discuss it," she said. but not as the payer. The man blinked. As the witness, she continued, to how my name was used without consent. Something shifted in his expression. A story, she realized, was beginning to turn, and this time she wasn't the footnote. The next conversation would determine whether Evan lost money or finally lost the illusion that his mother would always save him. The man from Everly and Co. never stepped inside. Elinor liked that. They stood on opposite sides of the threshold, him on the porch with his polished shoes and practiced calm, her on the familiar hardwood floor that had held her steady through far worse than this. "Mrs. Hale," he said carefully, opening the leather folder, "your son listed you as the financial guarantor on several vendor agreements. From a contractual standpoint, from a human standpoint," Elinor interrupted gently, "I was neither informed nor present." The man paused. Not offended, curious. "That distinction matters," she continued, "because consent matters, and so does documentation." She gestured toward the folder in his hands. "I'm sure you have signatures. What you won't have is mine." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of traffic and a gull crying overhead. "I see," he said slowly. "Your son indicated there was an understanding." Elinor almost laughed. "There was," she replied, "but it ended the moment I realized the understanding only went one way." The man closed the folder. "I'll note that," he said, his tone shifting, less authoritative now, more cautious. "This may become complicated." Elinor met his eyes without flinching. "It already is," she said, "just not for me." After he left, she closed the door and leaned her forehead against it, breathing out. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She walked back to the kitchen just as her phone rang again. "Evan," she answered. "Why is a legal representative calling me?" he demanded. "Why are you making this a legal issue?" "I didn't," Elinor said. "You did. When you used my name." "That's not fair," Evan snapped. "I didn't have a choice. Brianna's parents were under pressure. Everyone was counting on you." "Everyone except me," she replied. A pause. Then his voice changed, lower, rower. "You're really going to let this destroy everything? My marriage? My future?" Elinor closed her eyes. "I didn't destroy anything," she said. "I stopped absorbing the damage." "You're punishing me," he accused. "No," she corrected. "I'm allowing consequences." He exhaled sharply. "You don't understand the position I'm in." "I understand it perfectly," she said. "I lived it for decades. The difference is I never handed the bill to my child." Silence. Then, quietly, "I needed you." Elinor's chest tightened, but she didn't retreat. "You needed what I could give," she said, "not who I am." That was the truth he wasn't ready for. "I love you," she added, because it was still true. "But I won't disappear to make your life easier anymore." His breath hitched. "Mom, I don't know what to do." Elinor looked around her kitchen, at the small, sturdy life she had built brick by brick. "For the first time," she said softly, "neither do I, and that's okay." She ended the call. Outside, night settled over the neighborhood, calm and unremarkable. Inside, Elinor felt the aftershocks of a boundary that had taken a lifetime to draw. It hadn't broken her. It had finally revealed where she stood. But consequences have momentum, and by morning, Evan would face a choice that no amount of money could undo. Morning arrived without ceremony. No dramatic sunrise, no revelation wrapped in light. Just the soft gray of another Seattle day and the steady rhythm of Elinor's breath as she stood at the kitchen window, watching condensation trail down the glass. She slept better than she had in weeks. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Her phone lay untouched on the table. She didn't reach for it immediately. She made breakfast instead, toast, eggs, a ritual she had abandoned years ago when eating became something squeezed between obligations. Only after she finished did she check the screen. No missed calls. One text. "Evan, I'm coming by today. We need to talk face to face." Elinor read it twice. Then once more. She didn't reply. By noon, the house was ready, not because she expected company, but because she wanted it to reflect the truth. Clean, modest, intentional. She opened windows, letting fresh air replace the stale tension that had lingered for years without her noticing. At 1:30, a car pulled into the driveway, not the expensive rental Evan usually favored. An older sedan, dull paint. A car chosen out of necessity, not image. She watched him sit inside for a long moment before getting out. When he finally knocked, it wasn't the confident, entitled knock she'd known for years. It was tentative. She opened the door. Evan looked smaller, not physically but stripped. No tailored jacket, no performance. Just a man carrying the weight of decisions that no longer fit neatly on someone else's shoulders. "Hi," he said. "Hello, Evan." He stepped inside, eyes scanning the familiar space as if seeing it for the first time. The scuffed floor, the worn sofa, the quiet dignity of a life lived without spectacle. "I didn't realize," he said slowly, "how much I took for granted." Eleanor gestured toward the living room. He sat. She remained standing. "The wedding planner dropped us," he continued. "The venue's suing. Brianna moved out yesterday. Her parents won't return my calls." He looked up at her then, eyes rimmed red. "They're saying I misrepresented things. That I used you," Eleanor nodded. "You did." The words landed, not cruelly but firmly. "I didn't mean to," he said quickly. Everyone expected it. I thought that was how families worked." "Families don't run on assumptions," Eleanor replied. "They run on respect," he swallowed. "I don't know who I am without all of this," he admitted. "The image, the circle, the approval." Eleanor finally sat across from him. "Then this," she said gently, "is where you start finding out." Tears slipped down his face. Not dramatic, not performative, just real. "I'm scared," he whispered. "So was I," Eleanor said. "Every time I chose you over myself." He looked at her, stunned. "That's not something I should have had to do," she added. "And it's not something you get to ask of me again." He nodded once, slowly. "I understand," he said. "I don't like it. But I understand." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first honest sentence he'd spoken in years. What Evan would do next wouldn't determine whether Eleanor saved him, but whether she finally stopped waiting to be chosen. Evan left before sunset. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no promise of weekly dinners or repaired timelines. Just a quiet goodbye at the door, awkward, restrained, honest in a way neither of them had practiced before. "I don't know when I'll have answers," he said, hand on the doorknob. "But I know I can't ask you to fix this." Eleanor nodded. "That's a good place to begin." After he drove away, she stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening to the hum of the neighborhood returning to itself. A dog barked, a car passed. Somewhere someone laughed. Life undisturbed. She closed the door, not to shut him out but to claim the quiet. That night, Eleanor did something she'd never done without justification. She booked a trip. Not a cruise arranged around someone else's schedule. Not a visit planned to be helpful or convenient. A simple train journey north, followed by 3 nights in a small coastal town she'd once cataloged books about but never seen. The confirmation email landed in her inbox, and instead of guilt, she felt lightness. The next morning, she donated the dress. The woman at the counter smiled. "Beautiful fabric. Someone will be very happy in this." "I know," Eleanor replied, and she meant it. Days passed, then weeks. Evan called once. Not to ask for money, not to ask for solutions, just to talk. Sometimes Eleanor answered, sometimes she didn't. And for the first time, the choice felt mutual. She spent her days reclaiming corners of herself she hadn't visited in years. Long walks, slow meals, books read without interruption. She repainted the spare room, not to make space for someone else, but to turn it into something new. Her room. One afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table and opened her retirement account again. The number hadn't changed, but she had. She realized then that worthiness had never been about invitation lists or appearances or who sat at the head of the table. It was about presence, about choosing not to vanish for the comfort of others. Eleanor had spent a lifetime being reliable. Now she was becoming free. On the morning she left for her trip, she paused on the porch and looked back at the house. It wasn't grand, it wasn't curated, but it was hers. She locked the door, tucked the key into her pocket, and walked toward the waiting taxi with steady steps. Somewhere behind her, a story had ended. Ahead of her, another waited, unfunded by guilt, unedited by obligation, and finally authored by the woman who had learned, at last, that love should never require self-erasure. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor didn't ask what the future would cost, because she had already decided she was no longer for sale.